All right, we have an opportunity today to talk about moving from risk to opportunity. Big conversation around moving beyond looking at ESG as a risk only to how do you create value in the short and long terms using innovation and positioning companies for long-term value creation. So I'm Abby Davidson. I lead Corporate Citizenship's North America practice, and we have been around for about 20 years consulting with companies on sustainability and corporate responsibility. We have worked with over 300 clients, and we are a global company. So we've worked with clients in over 45 countries. We're headquartered in London. We have a strong presence across North America and all regions around the world. To my left, we have Caroline Rees, who is the president and co-founder of SHIFT, the leading center of expertise on the UN principles on business and human rights. Prior to co-founding SHIFT, Caroline was the lead advisor to Professor John Ruggie as he was drafting the principles, was also the director of governance and accountability at Harvard's Kennedy School of Governance corporate CSR initiative, and spent 14 years as a British diplomat. And then Tom, last but not least, certainly, is TerraCycle's founder and CEO, which is TerraCycle is the global leader in collection and repurposing of complex waste streams. They work across 21 countries and with some of the largest brands and retailers and manufacturers on recycling. And many of you may be aware of the announcement in January on Loop, which I know Tom will dive into and talk about. Tom's the author of 4 books, most recently, The Future of Packaging. So I'm excited to dive into this conversation. Let's start with the obvious question, which is, how do you flip the script? How do you transform from a risk-only framework to opportunity? And Caroline, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's one that sometimes has me thinking back to that story of the person who's standing on the street in the dark, looking under the street light and staring at the ground, and somebody comes by and says, "What are you looking for?" And he says, "I'm looking for my car keys." "Well, did you drop them there?" "No, I dropped them over there, but the light's here," right? And this is, I think, what we come up against when we're looking at the people part of sustainability. And it's quite an interesting contrast, I find, often to the planetary part, because I think there's every understanding that there is tremendous opportunity to bring positive and transformative change when a company looks at its end-to-end value chain and goes after the environmental impact and innovates and collaborates and shows leadership around those issues to drive systemic change. And we've heard on the last 2 panels about this, thinking systemically about how do we drive change. But flip that over to the people part of the equation, and suddenly we have a different conversation. What's our social product? Right? How are we delivering something that's a product to new populations or that has social purpose? Now that's great, but it completely slides over the top of what I'll just call the human footprint of companies, right? And so where is opportunity vis-a-vis risk? Well, here's the reality. When companies look at where are the places that people can be negatively affected in our end-to-end value chain, right? Where are those issues around living income, living wage? Where are those issues around child labour or forced labour? Where are the issues around land and displacement of communities? And say, how do I go after that? Because most of those issues are systemic challenges, right? They're not a flick a switch solution. And when you look at that and you say, well, we've got, we can see we have issues of sexual harassment in our tea plantations, or we can see we have forced labour in our electronic supply chain, or we can see we've got land and community issues when we're building renewable energy facilities. You're not saying, how do I do no harm, right? That is not the conversation you're having. You're saying, how do I systemically tackle this problem? How do I innovate around it? How do I collaborate around it? How do I fundamentally change the life experience of the most vulnerable people in these societies who are part of my value chain? So I think the problem is when we look elsewhere, we say that's risk, okay, we'll comply. Now, where's my opportunity? Let's go have a different conversation. The real opportunity is to say, how do I get my hands around those risks to people? How do I really understand what's driving them? And how do I bring that innovation and that collaboration and that leadership to transform lives and hit target after target in the Sustainable Development Goals as we start to measure the difference we make?
Yeah, great. So essentially understanding the underlying causes of inequity and human rights violations and understanding the underlying causes of those risks, and then looking beyond to say, now that we understand the systemic causes, where is the innovation and the opportunity for us to move forward? Interesting. So Tom will bring more of the environmental perspective on this.
Yeah, I look at it from a little bit more of the environmental side. I think of the social side is really important and very different. You know, for me, I learned this question quite painfully in building TerraCycle over the past 15 years, is that, you know, we're a mission-driven organization. Our mission is to eliminate the idea of waste. And so as we came up with innovations, like how do you recycle diapers or cigarettes, or you name it, hundreds of these different opportunities, we'd bring it to partners and we'd say, well, you know, you're a diaper company, you have a big challenge, you make diapers that account for 3% of landfills, and we can help you solve that problem. And here's the way we do it, and here's the bill. And because that was our mission, that's what we wanted to solve for. And if you found the right actor at that organization who was passionate, you'd get a little bit of funding, you know, for a year until they rotated to the next job, and then someone who came in that was P&L minded would then immediately ask, well, I like this. But the bigger it becomes, the bigger the bill is, so what's my benefit beyond just checking a box and sort of solving for a negative? And this was painful because we were like, well, isn't that in itself enough? Isn't that just, I mean, why do you need more? And once we realized to not frame the issue in what we cared about, or if you're in CSR, what you care about, but in what does the person who's footing the bill, what do they get their promotion on, what are their KPIs, how can they communicate it to their leadership? Then suddenly the magic opened. And a good example, I just pick up diapers, so that's a recent launch with Procter & Gamble in Holland. We just launched diaper recycling, and that's now expanding to other cities in Asia and Europe. And the unlocking principle was framing it not necessarily in here's how we solve a big issue, but here's how you gain market share. And that you can, you know, proudly, in this example, you know, recycle any branded diaper. You do it through, say, a Pampers brand, and then get benefit into the Pampers equity. You know, if you're even doing it with a competitive diaper, there's a good chance you'd shift. And then framing that in market share shift is a language everyone understood. And that suddenly ignited the ability for it to scale. And over, you know, framing that example in the language that the stakeholder who's funding understands is the secret sauce, and then enables scale. Enables scale. One of the big challenges, I think, in environment and sustainability is it's very complex. You know, I think the reason we can even have a debate on global warming or climate change is because it's very hard to explain in a Fox News soundbite. And that is really challenging. And so we need to, again, just understand this is the way the world works and play into it, then trying to, you know, sort of hope that people will take time to understand issues, that they will, you know, be different. And a good example on this, on Loop, I think what really created such a, you know, sort of this huge momentum, I mean, it's been unparalleled, the momentum we've seen on this platform. It's launching all over the world now with, you know, many major producers. And the key is that if you compare, you know, say reuse through Loop versus reuse through any other system out there, we're not the first reuse platform at all. There's tons of reuse platforms, but every reuse platform has been framing that the reason it's being is reuse, right? And that is a huge virtue. It's amazing. But the consumer would have to sacrifice on so many topics. They'd have to clean their packaging at home, take it to a store. That's a huge convenience sacrifice. They'd have to sacrifice on retailers, because big retailers don't really like implementing it. You'd have to sacrifice on brands, because brands, you know, big ones, you know, would struggle with it, from a QA, QC problem, all the way to complex products wouldn't be available. It was sacrifice. Even the packaging would be more standard and less inspired, and sacrifice for the virtue of reuse. But if you reframe and you make it not about the virtue of reuse, but much more, let's talk about the future of how we want to consume products. And in the future, shouldn't they be higher quality, more functional? And that can be enabled by shifting ownership. And then, by the way, also reuse. Then it suddenly unlocks a whole new frame of thinking, and people who think in the classic business context can really get around it in a really scalable, fast-moving way. So for me, the unlocking principle, whether you're an entrepreneur at your organization trying to enable sustainability, or a external force like we are trying to embed sustainability, it's really to try to simplify the message, frame it in the most basic motivator of the organization, like sell more stuff, gain market share, like really those basic pieces, you know, margin improvement, those type of things. and then try to demonstrate wins as quickly as possible. Those become unlocking principles for just absolutely big global expansion and consistency. The programs don't go away. They don't depend on the stakeholder who happened to champion it.
Great. So I want to ask each of you to get a little more specific about examples, now that we've started with kind of the overarching philosophy, to talk about how do you flip the script and how do you bring stakeholders on board? And what are a couple of specific examples, either in value chains that you've worked in, Caroline, or with specific industries that would be helpful to share with the audience? And then, Tom, I'll come to you after.
And I just want to sort of start by picking up on that issue of language and framing, right? Because I think one of the big challenges that people inside companies face is the language of human rights, right? It comes with the language of violation and grievance and risk and all this terrible stuff. Oh my gosh, is that legal liability and so on? And this just puts people off the conversation. But I mean, we just had a fantastic presentation about diversity and inclusion. What is that? It's a reframing of tackling discrimination in the workplace, right? So you've taken what is something that we don't, for many good reasons, societal and business-oriented, want to have, and we've found a way of talking about it that lets us understand the bigger goal that we're aiming for, and then go with that, right? And so we don't hear so much today about, you know, we're going after this on child labour and that on forced labour. We hear a lot about decent work. We hear a lot about enhanced livelihoods, right? So framing really does matter. It matters to get people motivated and understanding what the vision is behind what we're trying to do. So, you know, some examples, and you know, what's really critical here, I think, is that it gets applied, it gets targeted at what you're going after, right? Generic, we want to tackle big problem X doesn't get you anywhere, but this country, these stakeholders, this issue, and collaboration as well, and we heard in the environment, the paper space, that value of collaboration. Look, some examples, there are so many. Tea. In Malawi. So collaboration working there from the buyers through the producers, involving the smallholders, involving the national union for that industry, looking at, it's overwhelmingly women, and they are poverty wages off the bottom of the scale of global poverty wages, right? Extreme poverty. And so measurably looking at how you improve wages, right? Still a long way to go to living wage, but measurably showing improvement against that. But not just that. Women then getting better access through the workplace to nutrition that has effects on their health as well. Finding greater safety in how they're transported to work. It's also now getting into clarity and metrics around sexual harassment in that context. And it's almost like as you unlock one of these, you start to see how others come into the conversation. You have that catalytic effect. And it's also not in a sort of a people-only unit. There's also looking at quality of tea. It's looking at the productivity. It's looking at the sustainability of production. So you bundle these things together in those ways. Here in the United States, you know, a number of years back now, tomato picking in Florida, right? There were poverty wage issues, there were discrimination issues going on, and what today is the Fair Food Program. It started as the Immokalee Workers Coalition, working around that. Again, it started around wages, it started about linking up with buyers, but it's moved on now. It's looking at sexual harassment, it's all kinds of health issues in the workplace. Go to a different industry, you find that oil and gas and mining, looking at issues. Some companies there, Total Oil and Gas, Anglo-American, have said, you know, one of the big risks to people for us is road safety, right? And the deaths, particularly in Africa and regions like that, are excessively high. Well, any death is high, but you know, the numbers are particularly bad there. So really going after road safety and looking systemically at what that means and seeing the metrics change. And guess what? There's an SDG target on halving road traffic accidents. So you can connect it into this SDG discourse in these ways. So these are tangible. We can talk separately about the challenges of measurement. They are absolutely real. But there are aspects of this that are absolutely measurable, and you can show the change.
Yeah, I want to move to Tom to ask specifically about the stakeholders as you were in the process of bringing them on board, for example, to Loop. What was it that was particularly helpful for reaching a tipping point there? That's
a great question. You know, in Loop especially, because it's by definition this sort of robust multi-stakeholder coalition. We couldn't do it on our own. We need a not just one producer, but a whole range of producers. We need retailers. We need third parties, NGO actors, all acting together, getting across the finish line. So I'll tell you some of the tips and tricks that we used. I think that the first consumer product company to join Loop was Procter & Gamble, and that took actually quite a lot of work internally to have that process and get to a yes on it. But the framing wasn't about, look at all the guilt you have on this, all the negative, these sort of down, like what you're saying on human rights, like the violations, that type of language was never mentioned, because here's the point, everyone already knows it. Is there anyone here unaware of the crisis of ocean plastic? Please raise your hand and I'll explain it to you, but I'm certain no one here is unaware, so you don't have to rub it in, right? And it was much more about, okay, how do we really think about what the future is like? And so the framing, the first question in the meeting with them was, do you believe you can be in the business of disposability in 50 years? That was the opening question, and everyone said no. And I was like, okay, now, so you all agree we have to do something else, and the answer maybe this may not be. It's also not putting too much weight on one thing. It's about a lot of bets on the table. Loop is just one, and hopefully you'll take many, many others to explore it. And the key sort of unlocking principle was that it's not just about sustainability, it's about and our joke internally, so I apologize if you vote this way, but that the people wearing red hats in the middle of the country would buy this. That was the most important part, which is that it's for everyone, whether you care about sustainability or not. And that aspect, now in Loops concretely, that comes about because by not owning the package, the consumer can access a significantly higher quality package that has function and so on. And it's, by the way, breakthrough sustainable, not the purpose being breakthrough sustainable. And so why that really helped unlock at P&G is suddenly there was all these sort of ideas that they'd been developing for years that were shut down by procurement because the package value is so low, almost any innovation can't be commercialized. So it was one of these things where oh my God, all this stuff we've been dreaming about for decades and decades and decades that we know our consumer would be delighted by, that has nothing to do with sustainability, we can now commercialize because of reuse. And really unlocking where that can go. A good example is in a platform like this, we not only have a relationship with the product you buy, but the product you use. Imagine how powerful it is to know that it's your used Tide bottle coming back. It's as simple as, for example, the difference between what you ordered and what you returned is by definition what's in your home. I just think about how powerful that function can be. All the way to certain waste streams have diagnosable samples on them, whether it's the urine and cat litter all the way to the fecal matter in a diaper. Just to dream what's already sort of being developed, and this has nothing to do with reuse, but is enabled by that. And suddenly that creates this huge level of excitement. Then once you get one, as an outside player, it was much easier to get the next set, which in this case happened to be Mars, Unilever, Nestle, and Pepsi. And then from there, it created a landslide. The other things we used that was really, really valuable, why did we launch at Davos, was one key reason, was because it's an immovable line in the sand. And it's a big line in the sand, and you can't move it. If you're not ready, you're not there. We're not going to move the date. And that actually enabled so many players to get in line quickly. And especially when there's competitors at play, the moment Pepsi joined, Coke joined, the moment P&G joined, Unilever joined, and they were jockeying against each other. My favorite moment at Davos was, we had a little pavilion. Davos is like Cannes, where you have all these sort of pavilions in the main Congress Center, and we had a Loop pavilion, and there was a bunch of P&G products and Unilever products. And in comes David Taylor, the CEO of P&G, and he's looking at his products, congratulating his team, but he spends 90% of his time grazing the Unilever table, photographing, I know what he's doing, sending it to his teammates, saying, you got to check this out, and that was really cool. And then Alan, Joe, who's the new CEO of Unilever, comes by an hour later and does the same thing but inverted, and I'm back there just laughing because the system was benefiting by this overall piece. And it's also, so it's important to have these lines in the sand, especially to get all stakeholders together. It's important to have this sort of friendly, competitive nature to it, whether it's within the retailers or the stakeholders. We also found that it was good to bring in external partners, so we set Loop up as an official project at the World Economic Forum, so there was sort of this external governing type party. And while it is a consortium, this is really important in how you run a consortium, because I've recently did an interview with a group that asked about how do you manage consortiums, because it's just a bunch of people talking around the table taking no action. And when it is a bunch of people around the table, that many times is what happens, because it's hard to get alignment. So while it is multi-stakeholder, everyone comes through Loop. And this way, we can maintain the momentum in this direction and not have to have 100% alignment. Because if you have to have every single one of us in the table agreeing, we go nowhere. right? So there's a need for someone to say, thank you all for your points of view. We're going to try to make everyone a winner, and this is where we're going. Next step, and we go. And that's so important, because I've seen this especially in waste, where really well-intentioned people, say like flexible packaging, are trying to get together and do a multi-stakeholder coalition where we make, flexible packaging recyclable, but it's all sort of everyone around the table expressing their concerns, and it ends up being, very little action, and that's very draining for the people who put their valuable time and resource into being there and engaging. And then so the final point here is then stacking wins and celebrating them and having those moments also really are amazing, because it galvanizes the organization. When we walk through some of the offices of our partners, especially the mid-level and younger people are so proud and so engaged and want to be a part of it. So it's celebrating that publicly in a big way, not hiding it. I had one partner in Loop, the name is not relevant, but they told me that one of their biggest regrets after seeing it all play out was that they didn't proactively highlight internally, because they're the type of company who wants to have everything done and then celebrate once they've accomplished all their goals. And I get it, I understand why that's the point of view, but it's, I think, important to celebrate along the way, because sometimes these sustainability journeys are very, very long, and if the end point is years away, that excitement doesn't last all the way through the process, and you need to maintain and stack these sort of celebratory moments and try to have something to show for it along the way.
Great. So start with a long-term view with 50 years or so. Change the value equation so you can begin to unlock innovation at a company or among stakeholders that may have been pent up for years but didn't have a go because there was a particular constraint that no one could get beyond. Bring stakeholders and competitors, if possible, on board, and then celebrate wins along the way versus waiting to the end.
I just want to build one last thing is, we're in a world today where we can change assumptions. We don't have to assume all the big assumptions are holy. That is so important, and it's so fluid. That's the beauty of how fast you can create a business right now, how fast you can get an idea out, not just as a competitive risk, but internally too. All assumptions are open for grabs, so don't necessarily assume that the box is the box. Change a wall and some interesting things may happen.
Yeah. So Caroline, how do you get investors on board, especially with you sitting in the S space of this work?
Yeah, and there's been a lot of interesting conversations over the last 2 days about the ESG mix. And I think this is, what we see I would say, clearly the most challenging part of ESG, right? The conversations abroad, it's ESG, it's socially responsible investing, then the examples outside of health and safety and diversity and inclusion are all E and G, because we run short of what we really want to say about the S. So it is, I think, it's on a slower track, or not a slower track actually, I think it's a faster track, but it's a younger track perhaps than some of the environmental conversation has been as to what's really meaningful here, what really makes for change. I think really critical in the conversations that I've been hearing has been the observation, which in some ways I think is obvious, that materiality is 1,000 different things, right, depending on where you sit and what you value as an investor, right? It isn't, I think in this day and age, it's less and less just about strict financial materiality, and apart from anything else, it's quite hard to look at some of these human impacts and put financial metrics around them without looking long term. It is, I think, about coming back to values. And I think that's true whether you're sitting in a company talking about this or you're an investor talking about this. We know, and it's in many ways valid, that people reach for the business case and the financial value and how does this affect what we can say in the near term. But I think the increasingly there's an understanding that the real value of that is limited. Whereas there's a business case, use the business case. It's a tool in the toolbox. If you can use it to leverage a conversation, to get somebody on board, use the heck out of it. We do that as well. We look at where it's self-evident and it helps to drive change. But in actual fact, a great deal of this sits in that conversation around values. And I think what we've heard here and what we hear increasingly around investor-oriented conferences is that investors bring their own values to this. And it isn't just about the financial. They are looking for things that they believe in. And I think those are the things that drive change. What I think is really critical today is that we have, I would suggest, two tragedies of the commons going on. One, self-evidently, is climate change. There's been a lot of embracing of that, the bigger vision of what this is about. So perhaps a little less dependency on the digit-by-digit business case of every aspect of a footprint of the company in that regard. The other is social cohesion and stability. And that is surely the story of the last 2-3+ years, or at least it has manifested in an undeniable way in the last 2-3+ years. And that breakdown in social cohesion and stability is the product of a manner in which globalization has happened that has marginalized the vulnerable in society, and that has left people with decreasing amounts of hope, right? That classic metric that is now flipping, that used to be, whether it's in the United States or it's in the United Kingdom or it's in Vietnam, it used to be, do you think your kids will have a better life than you? And the answer used to be overwhelmingly yes. It is now not in any of these three geographies, and that's the reality. That is the other tragedy of the commons, and that is why addressing the ways in which people become marginalized, made more vulnerable, lose access to basic human dignity through the ways that business gets done as well as what other actors do. It is critical to values, is critical to what business is about, is critical to the long-term sustainability of business, and therefore is critical to investors. And I think just as much as we use business cases where they're there, where we try and find business cases where they're not yet apparent, we need to not shy away from the values argument, because if it has never been more manifest as to why that matters to us than it is in our societies today.
Yeah, we have a moment.
Can I answer a couple of the questions that have been sent in?
Yeah, jump in.
So just a little sort of tactical pieces. I think the first question up on the board, that we're seeing it here on the screen as well, is what will packaging look like in 50 years? I mean, I have no idea. I think that we need to test so many things. Can we go to completely package-free, like no concept of packaging? There's some great examples, like Lush Cosmetic has done that incredibly well. Can we go packaging as a service? But I think what we need to do is we need to think through how do we put different ecosystems in play where we can have completely regenerative systems. Recycling is a great idea. Package-free, durable, all these things simultaneously. I don't think we can have one silver bullet, though. I think we need to experiment, and now's a really great time to do that. There's a couple questions on life cycle, and I want to talk about that because we learned a lot in working with our partners, retailers and vendors on Loop, on how do you really get to the absolute right life cycle on it. And the key learning was have all the actors do what they're really good at, and try not to create as few new systems as absolutely possible. So a good example is, it's sort of intuitive. Loop is an engine for brands to enable durable versions of their products. But Loop is also an engine for retailers. That's been an area a little less talked about. We'll be announcing our US retail partner in May, which is one of the biggest here in the country, but we've already announced that Tesco and Carrefour are the UK and French retail partners. And so they're integrating the engine into their e-com or online shopping as well as their physical brick and mortar. And so the way it will work if you're in Paris and suburbs and London and suburbs, you'll be able to go to a physical Carrefour or Tesco store. You'll see a package-free aisle, everything sort of merchandised together, but all your favorite products now in these durable, reusable packs. You buy them off the shelf, you enjoy them at home, and then you're given effectively a durable garbage bag, if you will, with a QR code on it, but a reusable one. You throw all your items in there. Again, proudly a disposable experience, right? So dirty, throw it in like garbage. I mean, proudly so. And then when you're done, you take it and you drop it off at the store. You associate that QR code with yourself. And then when we check it in, we associate all the deposits back to your QR code and you get your money back. And by the way, it doesn't matter what shape you return the pack, because why shouldn't the producer be responsible for what they made, not the consumer? On a life cycle analysis there, the nice thing is it's no extra trips. You're already going to the store, and on your next trip, you're already going anyway. So there's no new transportation occurring to get that product back, which is really exciting. On an e-com point of view, again, way better. Tesco and Carrefour already have their own fleets. They're delivering in their own trucks or third parties, but not a UPS or FedEx in their own, encapsulated, let's say, fleet. And all those trucks are by definition going back empty from the home. So basically there, when you order e-com, your Loop product, you get it, you enjoy it. Again, you then give the bag now to the e-com driver, and they'll take back on any delivery, they'll pick up any used pack, which means not a new truck on the road, not a new mile driven. The only time that that doesn't work is if the retailer, like our US retail partner that we'll be announcing in May, does not have its own fleet, because America is quite a large country. There, it's a third-party carrier like a UPS, which will be delivering, and you book a pickup with them and send it back. Even by having that pickup, Durable from multiple LCAs show that the first time you make a durable product, it is more environmentally expensive than a disposable one, no question, right? But disposable only has a use of one, a denominator of one, which means every time you make it, it's the same impact over and over again. So 11 shampoo bottles in disposable are equal to 1 times 11. In durable, the first time you make it, say at aluminum, it is more expensive environmentally. In shampoo, for example, comparing a reusable aluminum bottle to a disposable and recyclable HDPE bottle, somewhere between the second and third use, they become equal in environmental impact. By the 5th use, they become 50%. The durable becomes 50% better. By the 11th use, about 75% better, and then maintains there. And I want to highlight this because there is no perfect product. The perfect product is the one you don't buy. We really need to, now as individuals, not as business stakeholders, the white elephant in the room, the link to every environmental issue, whether it's climate change, whether it's, we heard earlier, deforestation, species reduction, doesn't matter what it is. The nice thing about that ridiculous complexity is there's only one thing that causes all of it, which is consumption. And that is actually really nice because it links to one action we take, which is the act of buying. And I think we as individuals need to realize that we take this political vote so crazy seriously. Every 4 years we vote with our a pen and a piece of paper or whatever, a punch card for A to B. It's a really important decision, but there's a lot of energy put into it. Yet we are voting for the future we want multiple times a day with cash on what we buy. And that is, I think, way more powerful than the political vote. And yet, as individuals, we're not really taking responsibility on that. It's sort of like if we walked into the political election and blindly voted and didn't care. I mean, that's what we're doing in consuming, and consuming is not just what you spend money on, what you choose when you go out to the bar over there, what you take in the airport lounge. That is an act of voting. If we all stopped, taking the cheese in the single wrap, they would stop providing it, right? And I just want to speak to us as individuals on how powerful that is, and can we share that message with other individuals there who probably feel completely powerless and say, oh, it's the big companies that force everything. So just important, I think, as we think about how, again, to create simple sustainability communication, because complexity is the enemy of this cause. And we suck at communicating it. I mean, look at I'll just finish with this, is when there's these famous debates on YouTube between Bill Nye the Science Guy and, I don't remember the evolutionary dude, on the other side. And if you just look back and don't actually listen to the facts, the argument of the person believing in dinosaurs, in the biblical version, not in evolution, is way more compelling. And it's because of the simplicity of communication. And we need to just accept that's the way the world is and play into it, not try to argue our way around it with monster complexity that everyone's going to tune out because it sounds like NPR,
Thanks, Tom. I am being told to wrap up. You all have been very generous in staying past time. This was a discussion that I think we could have kept going for another hour, at least from where I sit. There are wonderful questions on the screen that we did not get a chance to address. I think we're at a moment right now where we're redefining what we value. Investors are redefining what they value. And we're in a moment where we can begin to unleash innovation in really profound ways to solve some of these big long-term challenges. So I want to thank our speakers, and I want to thank all of you for your time this afternoon.